She was forced to marry the Alpha King who never wanted her, until he learned who she truly was. The northern village of Ravenspire had seen better days. Wooden houses, worn gray by wind and time, leaned against each other like tired old friends along the frost-cracked main road. Smoke curled from clay chimneys, carrying the scent of pine wood and yesterday's fish stew. Women hung washing on frozen lines, their breath forming small clouds in the bitter morning air, while children chased chickens through patches of dirty snow. It was the sort of place travelers passed through quickly, eyes forward, without bothering to remember its name. Until today. Today, Ravenspire would be remembered. Today, the Alpha King had come to collect his debt. Rena stood at the very edge of the crowd that had gathered in the village square, partially hidden behind old Marin's fruit cart. From this position, she could see everything while being seen by as few people as possible. At 23, she had perfected the art of making herself forgettable. Not that she was unattractive, not exactly. Her mother Hera had often said she had her grandmother's bone structure, high cheekbones and a straight nose that might have been called noble in another life. Her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, almost golden in certain light, though she'd learned to keep them downcast to avoid questions. But after her father's disgrace 7 years ago, after the whispers about dark magic and forbidden bloodlines had started, after they'd been cast out from the inner village to the fisherman's quarter where the houses smelled of salt and rot, Rena had discovered that beauty without protection was just another kind of danger. She'd learned to dim her light, to wrap herself in rough wool the color of mud, to keep her thick black hair braided tight against her scalp and hidden under a frayed kerchief, to hunch her shoulders just slightly, to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less remarkable. Survival, her mother had taught her, sometimes meant making yourself a shadow. She sipped from a wooden cup of weak tea she'd brought from home and allowed herself a small moment of grim satisfaction. This was safe enough, standing at the edges, fulfilling her duty as a member of the village by bearing witness, while avoiding the looks of pity that came whenever the other young women gathered to gossip about betrothals and bride prices. That one. A voice cut through the cold air like a blade through butter. Rena's hand froze, the cup halfway to her lips. The voice had come from near the center of the square, where the Alpha King sat atop a massive black stallion that looked like it had been carved from midnight itself. The animal's breath came out in great plumes of steam, its eyes rolling white at the edges, as if it could barely contain the violence coiled in its muscles. But it was the man on the horse who made the air feel thin. Alpha King Gordon was exactly as the stories described. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair pulled back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so completely devoid of warmth. He wore black leather and fur despite the formal nature of his visit, and a sword hung at his hip with the casual presence of something used often and without ceremony. His eyes, a pale, unsettling gray, swept across the crowd with the interest one might show a herd of cattle. "Your Majesty?" This voice belonged to Commander Coden, the king's right hand, a man with a scarred face and reputation for cruelty. He sat on a brown horse beside his king, his posture alert, predatory. That young woman, behind the cart, who is she? Rena's heart dropped into her stomach like a stone down a well. Several heads turned in her direction. She considered stepping forward to make her presence known, to control the narrative before it controlled her. But something in the king's tone, flat, transactional, utterly devoid of human interest, kept her frozen in place. Elder Bowen, the village headman, stepped forward with his walking stick, his old bones creaking audibly in the silence. "That is Rena, Your Majesty, daughter of Hera. Perfectly ordinary family, though they've had some difficulties in recent years." Difficulties. The king's voice held no real curiosity, just the barest acknowledgement that words had been spoken. "Her father passed under unfortunate circumstances, I'm afraid," Bowen said carefully, which was the village's polite way of saying he'd been driven out and died alone in the woods under suspicion of harboring old magic. "Nothing that reflects poorly on the girl, Your Majesty. Hera works as a washerwoman now. Respectable work. And Rena herself is. Well, she's quiet. Keeps to herself. Been of marrying age for years, but she never. That is, no one ever. No one wanted her," Coden finished bluntly, his scarred mouth twisting with something that might have been amusement. Rena felt the words like a slap, though they were nothing she hadn't heard whispered behind hands at the well, at the market, in the spaces between prayers at the village shrine. "Is she desperate to marry?" the king asked, and Rena's hands clenched around her cup hard enough that the wood creaked. The audacity. The casual cruelty of discussing her like a piece of merchandise, and not even valuable merchandise at that. Desperate, Bowen hedged, his political instincts warring with his desire to be rid of the cursed daughter of a cursed man. I wouldn't say desperate, Your Majesty, but she must know her prospects grow thinner with each passing season. At her age, she cannot afford to be particular. Perfect, King Gordon said, and Rena heard satisfaction in that single word, cold and final as a door slamming shut. Absolutely perfect. Before Rena could process what was happening, the king dismounted in one fluid movement and strode toward her with the purposeful gait of a man accustomed to having obstacles simply move out of his way. The crowd parted like water. Old Marin actually wheeled her cart aside, abandoning Rena's cover with apologetic eyes. And then he was there, standing close enough that she could smell leather and pine and something else, something wild and electric that made the hair on her arms stand up beneath her rough sleeves. Up close, Alpha King Gordon was even more imposing. He stood at least a head taller than her, and she wasn't a small woman. His face was all hard angles and sharp edges, handsome in the way a weapon was handsome, beautiful in its efficiency. But it was his eyes that held her, pale gray like winter ice, looking at her with the same expression one might use to evaluate a horse's teeth. Rena, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a verdict. You will do. I beg your pardon. The words came out smaller than she'd intended. Your village owes the crown a debt, Gordon said, loud enough now that everyone could hear. 10 years ago, during the border wars, crown soldiers died defending Ravenspire from the southern incursions. A blood debt was recorded. I have come to collect. Elder Bowen stepped forward, wringing his hands. Your Majesty, we are a poor village. We have no gold, no goods of sufficient value to. I don't want your gold, Gordon cut him off. I want a wife. The words fell into the square like stones into still water, and the ripples of shock spread through the crowd in audible gasps. The council has decided I need an heir. The king continued in that same flat, disinterested tone. I need a wife to provide one. I have no interest in the political circus of courting some nobleman's daughter who will expect love and attention I have no intention of providing. I need someone uncomplicated. Someone without a powerful family to interfere. Someone who understands this is a transaction, not a romance. His eyes fixed on Rena again, and she felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. Someone no one will miss enough to cause problems when I ignore her. The cruelty of it stole her breath. Around her, she could feel the village's collective relief, horrible and palpable. They would give her up. Of course they would. The cursed daughter of a cursed man, traded away to settle a debt and spare everyone else. Your Majesty, Rena found her voice, though it shook slightly. Surely there are other women more suitable. I've made my choice, Gordon said with the finality of an executioner's blade. He turned to Elder Bowen. The blood debt is settled. Have her things packed. We leave within the hour. Wait, Rena's mother's voice rang out, and Hera pushed through the crowd, her washerwoman's hands still red from the morning's work. Please, Your Majesty, she's all I have. Then you should have valued her more, Gordon said without looking at her. Or perhaps you should thank me. I'm taking a burden off your hands and giving her a title. A queen is better than a washerwoman's daughter, even if she'll be a queen in name only. He finally looked at Rena again, and something in those cold eyes made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. Pack your things, girl. You belong to the crown now. Then he turned and walked back to his horse, dismissing her, dismissing all of them, with the casual arrogance of a man who had never once been told no. Rena stood in the square, her simple cup of tea now cold in her shaking hands, and realized her entire life had just been decided in the span of a few brutal minutes. The other villagers were already looking away, relieved. Even her mother's protests had died in her throat, and in that moment, Rena felt something shift inside her chest. Something old and vast and starlit that she'd kept carefully locked away for 7 years, ever since her father had died whispering warnings about keeping her nature hidden. The king thought he was taking a powerless, plain nobody. He had no idea that the girl standing behind the fruit cart was the single most dangerous person in the entire north. That the blood running through her veins was the same blood that had once tamed the wildest wolves and toppled ancient thrones. But Rena had learned that power without protection was just another way to die. So she said nothing. She simply set down her cup, pulled her threadbare cloak tighter, and turned toward the small house she shared with her mother. Behind her, she heard Commander Coden speak quietly. "Are you certain, Your Majesty? She looks half-starved. Hardly fit for a king's bed." Gordon's response was cold and final. "I don't need her for my bed, Coden. I need her to be silent, sign the documents, and stay out of my way. She looks like she knows how to do all three." As Rena climbed the steps to her house, each footfall feeling like walking toward an execution, she didn't notice the way the king's stallion suddenly went still as she passed. Didn't see how its wild eyes calmed for just a moment, tracking her movement with an intelligence that seemed almost human. But Commander Coden noticed. And deep in the Alpha King's chest, something he hadn't felt in years, something he thought had died long ago, stirred for just a heartbeat before going silent again. Before we continue with what happened next, please like and subscribe to this channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support means everything. Now, what Rena didn't know as she packed her few belongings was that the palace she was being taken to held a secret far darker than a loveless marriage. And what the king didn't know was that the plain, silent girl he just claimed would be the only thing standing between him and a fate worse than death. But she would discover the truth soon enough. They both would. And when she did, there would be no going back. Chapter 1. The Bargain of Blood. The journey to the capital began in silence. Rena sat in the back of a rough wooden cart, her single bag clutched in her lap like a shield. She'd been given no proper carriage, no comfort befitting a woman who was supposedly about to become queen. Just this creaking farm cart that smelled of hay and horse manure, driven by a palace servant who hadn't spoken a single word to her since they left Ravenspire. The message was clear. She might be given a title, but she would never be treated as if she truly held it. Behind her, the village had disappeared into the morning mist. Her mother had cried, of course, but she hadn't fought. No one had. They'd watched Rena being taken with the same relief people felt when a storm passed over their homes to destroy someone else's instead. Perhaps you could blame them, living in fear as they did, always one bad harvest away from starvation. Or perhaps you couldn't. Perhaps some abandonments were simply unforgivable, no matter the circumstances. Rena pulled her thin cloak tighter against the cold wind and tried not to think about it. The king and his men rode ahead on horseback, a dark cluster of leather and steel that cut through the forest road like a blade. Gordon hadn't looked at her once since they'd left, hadn't spoken to her, hadn't acknowledged her existence beyond pointing at the cart and saying, "Put her there." She told herself she was grateful for the distance. They traveled for hours through the pine forests of the north, the road gradually widening as they moved south toward the heartlands. The trees here were ancient, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even midday felt like dusk. Rena had never been this far from home, had never been more than a day's walk from Ravenspire in her entire life. Everything felt foreign, dangerous, wrong. It was late afternoon when the king finally called for a stop at a clearing beside a frozen stream. The men dismounted to water the horses and distribute hard bread and dried meat from their saddlebags. Rena remained in the cart, unsure if she was allowed to move, unsure if she was even allowed to eat. No one offered her anything. She was beginning to think they'd simply forgotten about her when a shadow fell across the cart. She looked up to find Alpha King Gordon standing there, holding a water skin and a piece of bread. Up close, in the cold gray light of the winter afternoon, he looked tired. There were lines around his eyes that she hadn't noticed before, and a tightness to his jaw that spoke of teeth clenched against some constant pain. "Eat," he said, thrusting the items toward her. "I need you alive when we reach the capital. Not I need you healthy, or I need you well. Just alive. The bare minimum." Rena took the offerings with numb fingers. "Thank you, Your Majesty." He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the cart, his arms crossed, studying her with those unsettling pale eyes. For a long moment he said nothing, and Rena forced herself to take small bites of the bread, even though her throat felt too tight to swallow. "I want to be clear about something," Gordon finally said, his voice low enough that his men wouldn't overhear. "What happened in your village, what's happening now, this isn't a love story. This isn't a fairy tale where the common girl marries the king, and they live happily ever after." Rena stopped chewing, met his eyes, said nothing. "The Council of Lords has been pressuring me to marry for 3 years, he continued, his tone flat and businesslike, as if discussing a trade agreement. They want an heir. They want the succession secured. They want me to produce a son and train him to take the throne when I'm gone." He paused, something dark flickering across his features. "I have no interest in any of that. But the council has made it clear they'll make governing impossible if I don't at least appear to comply. So I need a wife. On paper. For appearances." "I understand," Rena said quietly, though understanding didn't make it hurt less. "Do you?" Gordon's laugh was bitter, humorless. "You'll live in the palace. You'll have rooms in the Queen's wing. You'll attend state functions when absolutely required and sign whatever documents are put in front of you. In exchange, you'll have food, shelter, and safety. More than you had in that fishing village. More than you deserve," his tone implied. "But make no mistake," he continued, and now his voice went cold, each word precisely chosen and deliberately cruel. "I will never love you. I will never desire you. I will never even think about you unless forced to by circumstance. You will be my wife in name only. A signature on a document. A body in a room I never visit." The words landed like physical blows, each one designed to wound, to establish dominance, to make sure she knew exactly how little she mattered. Rena felt something hot and sharp twist in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or anger. Or just the simple, painful recognition that even here, even elevated to queen, she would still be unwanted. Still be a burden. Still be the cursed girl people wished would simply disappear. She set down the bread carefully, folded her hands in her lap, and looked directly into the Alpha King's cold gray eyes. "Good," she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Because I don't want your love, your majesty. I didn't ask to be taken from my home. I didn't ask to be paraded through my village like livestock and claimed as payment for a debt I had nothing to do with. You needed a convenient wife who wouldn't cause problems. Fine. You have one." Something flickered in Gordon's expression. Surprise, perhaps. He clearly hadn't expected resistance, even verbal resistance, from the quiet, beaten-down girl he'd plucked from behind a fruit cart. "But let's be equally clear," Rena continued, feeling years of swallowed words rising up her throat like floodwater. "I will play my part. I will sign your documents and attend your functions and stay out of your way. But don't expect gratitude. Don't expect me to pretend this prison is a palace or this bargain is a blessing. You may own my circumstances, your majesty. You will never own me." The clearing had gone quiet. Rena realized, with a cold shock, that the other men had stopped what they were doing and were now watching this exchange with barely concealed fascination. No one, apparently, spoke to the Alpha King this way. Gordon's face had gone utterly still, unreadable as carved stone. For a long moment, Rena thought he might strike her, or have her thrown from the cart, or simply leave her here in the forest to find her own way back to Ravenspire. Instead, he did something unexpected. He smiled. It was a terrible smile, sharp and cold and entirely without warmth, but it was a smile nonetheless. "You have more spine than I thought," he said quietly. "Good. Spineless things break too easily, and I need you to be functional." Then he pushed away from the cart and walked back toward his men, calling out orders to prepare to move again. Rena sat there, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hands shaking with the aftermath of her own boldness. She'd just challenged the Alpha King. She'd just drawn a line in the sand between them. And somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. As the cart lurched into motion again, Rena allowed herself one small, grim moment of satisfaction. Gordon thought he'd claimed a silent, obedient shadow. Instead, he'd gotten someone who would fight for her dignity even if she'd lost everything else. Let him ignore her. Let him pretend she didn't exist. She would survive this. She would endure. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to be more than just a name on a document. What Rena didn't know was that Commander Coden had been watching the entire exchange from beside the horses. And what she couldn't see was the way he now looked at his king with new concern in his scarred face. Because in 3 years of the council pressuring Gordon to marry, the king had never, ever smiled. Not once. Not until now. What had just changed? And more importantly, what would it cost them all when the palace discovered that their new queen was not quite as powerless as she appeared? Chapter 2, The Gilded Cage. The palace at Thornhaven rose from the landscape like something out of a fever dream. Rena had imagined a grand building, certainly, but nothing had prepared her for this. Massive stone walls that seemed to touch the clouds. Towers with peaked roofs that gleamed like silver in the fading afternoon light. Gardens that sprawled across acres, even in winter showing careful cultivation. And everywhere soldiers. Dozens of them, patrolling the walls, standing guard at gates, their armor catching the sun like scattered stars. This wasn't just a palace. This was a fortress. The cart passed through 3 separate gates before finally rolling to a stop in a courtyard paved with smooth gray stones. Servants appeared immediately, though Rena noticed they came for the king's horse, not for her. She climbed down from the cart alone, her legs stiff from hours of sitting, her single bag clutched awkwardly in her arms. "Someone show the girl to the queen's quarters," Gordon said without looking at her, already striding toward the main entrance. "Have her cleaned up and dressed appropriately. The council wants to see her tomorrow." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing through massive oak doors that swung shut behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. An older woman in a gray servant's dress approached Rena with an expression of professional neutrality. "This way, my lady. I'm Mrs. Carlson, head of the household staff. I'll show you to your rooms." Rena followed her through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Marble floors, tapestries depicting battles and hunts, candelabras dripping with crystals. Everything gleamed with wealth that made her threadbare dress feel like an insult to the very air. They climbed a wide staircase to the 3rd floor, then walked down another long hallway, before finally stopping at a set of double doors carved with wolves and stars. "The Queen's wing," Mrs. Carlson said, pushing open the doors. "It hasn't been occupied in 7 years, not since the king's mother passed. We've aired it out and prepared fresh linens." The rooms beyond were bigger than Rena's entire house in Ravenspire. A sitting room with velvet furniture in deep burgundy. A bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in silk. Windows that overlooked the palace gardens. A private bathing room with a copper tub large enough to swim in. It was beautiful, luxurious, expensive, and it felt exactly like a cage. "I'll have a bath drawn," Mrs. Carlson said, "and send up the seamstress to measure you for proper clothing. Dinner is at 8, though I'm told you won't be expected to attend tonight." Of course not. Gordon wouldn't want to look at her any sooner than necessary. Mrs. Carlson left, and Rena stood alone in the center of the opulent sitting room, her small bag still in her hands, feeling more out of place than she'd ever felt in her life. She was examining a portrait of a severe-looking woman who must have been Gordon's mother when she heard the doors open behind her. "So it's true," a voice like honey laced with poison said. "The king actually brought home a peasant." Rena turned to find a woman standing in the doorway, and her first thought was that this person looked like everything Rena was not. Tall and willowy, with golden hair arranged in elaborate curls. A dress of emerald silk that probably cost more than Ravenspire's entire annual tax revenue. Jewelry that caught the light with every breath. And a face that might have been beautiful if not for the cruel twist of her painted lips. "I'm Lady Janella Worthing," the woman said, gliding into the room uninvited. "The king's close companion. I wanted to see for myself what sort of creature he'd dragged back from the north." She circled Rena slowly, like a cat examining a mouse. "My goodness, the rumors don't do it justice. You really are plain, aren't you? Rough skin, chapped lips, and that dress. Is that actually burlap? Do people in your village wear actual burlap?" Rena felt heat rising in her cheeks but kept her voice level. "It's wool, my lady, and I wasn't given much time to pack my finer things." "Finer things?" Janella laughed, a crystalline sound that held no warmth whatsoever. "Oh, darling, I doubt you own finer things. But don't worry, I'm sure the seamstress can make you presentable. Even if she can't make you pretty." She picked up a delicate porcelain figure from a side table, examining it with casual possessiveness. "I suppose you're wondering who I am. Gordon and I have been intimate for 3 years. Everyone at court knows I'm the woman who shares his bed. The woman he actually desires." The words were designed to wound, and they did, though not in the way Janella probably intended. Rena didn't want Gordon's desire, but the casual cruelty, the deliberate attempt to establish dominance, reminded her viscerally that she had just entered a battlefield far more dangerous than anything she'd faced in Ravenspire. "The council forced him to marry you for appearances," Janella continued, setting down the figure with a sharp click. "But nothing else will change. He'll still come to my rooms at night. He'll still whisper my name. You'll just be the unfortunate woman who has to sit on a throne and pretend not to notice." She moved closer, her perfume overwhelming, expensive and cloying. "So here's some advice, little peasant queen. Stay in your cage. Sign what they tell you to sign. Smile when required. And don't ever forget that you are here because you are convenient, not because you are wanted. Rena met her eyes, those cold blue eyes that held such casual cruelty, and thought about her father, about his warnings, about the power sleeping in her blood that these people knew nothing about. "Thank you for the welcome, Lady Janella," she said quietly. "It's been very illuminating." Janella's smile sharpened. "Oh, I like you. You have just enough pride to make breaking you interesting." She headed for the door, then paused. "One more thing. There are rules in this palace. Hierarchies. The king may have given you a title, but titles mean nothing without power to back them up. And you, darling, have no power at all." Then she was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of her perfume and the echo of her laughter. Rena sank into one of the velvet chairs, her legs suddenly shaking. In the space of one day, she'd been claimed by a king who despised her and threatened by a mistress who saw her as entertainment. The wilderness had wolves and winter and starvation. But at least in the wilderness, you could see your enemies coming. What Rena didn't notice as she sat there, overwhelmed and alone, was the way the candles in her room suddenly burned brighter for just a moment. The way the temperature rose slightly, as if something inside her had responded to the threat. And what Janella didn't know as she walked back to her own lavish rooms, satisfied with her intimidation, was that she had just made a very dangerous mistake. Because the powerless peasant she'd just threatened was the last living descendant of the star-blooded line. And in 3 days, during the next full moon, the palace would discover exactly what that meant. Chapter 3. The King's Madness. Rena couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, and her mind wouldn't stop replaying Janella's words. "You have no power at all." She'd heard similar words her entire life, but here, in this golden cage, they felt more true than ever. At midnight, she gave up on sleep and wrapped a dressing gown around herself, one of several garments Mrs. Carlson had left. The palace hallways were dimly lit by oil lamps, casting shadows that danced across the marble floors. She walked without direction, just needing to move, to feel less trapped. Perhaps if she'd been paying attention, she would have noticed the servants weren't in these corridors. Perhaps she would have seen the claw marks gouged into the wooden doorframe of the chamber at the end of the hall. Perhaps she would have heard the low, guttural growling coming from within. But she was lost in her own thoughts, and by the time she realized something was wrong, it was too late. The growl came again, louder this time, from behind a door that stood slightly ajar. And then a sound that made her blood run cold, a man's voice, ragged with pain, choking out words that weren't quite human. Without thinking, Rena pushed the door open. The chamber beyond was in chaos. Furniture overturned, curtains shredded, and in the center of it all, on his hands and knees, was Alpha King Gordon. Except he barely looked human. His eyes had gone completely silver, glowing in the darkness like twin moons. His hands were contorted, fingers curved into claws that had torn through the carpet beneath him. His teeth were bared, elongated into fangs, and his whole body shook with violent tremors. The veins in his neck and arms stood out black against his skin, pulsing with something that looked like liquid shadow. He was transforming, shifting into something between man and beast. And from the looks of it, he was losing the battle to remain in control. A low snarl ripped from his throat as he sensed her presence. His silver eyes locked onto her, and there was no recognition in them. No humanity. Just feral hunger and rage. Rena should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn and flee. But she'd seen something else in that brief moment when their eyes met. Beneath the rage and the wildness, there was pain. Terrible, agonizing pain. He was suffering. "Your Majesty," she whispered, taking a step forward instead of back. "Gordon." He lunged. It happened so fast she didn't have time to scream. One moment he was across the room. The next he was on top of her, his clawed hand around her throat, lifting her off the ground. His face was inches from hers, more wolf than man, his breath hot and rank. Rena's hands flew to his wrist, trying to pry his fingers away, but he was impossibly strong. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision as her air was cut off. And then, without meaning to, without even knowing she was doing it, something inside her responded. Her hands began to glow. Soft at first, just a faint golden shimmer across her palms. Then brighter, warm and pulsing like starlight made solid. The light spread from her hands to his wrist, flowing up his arm like liquid fire. Gordon's silver eyes went wide. His grip loosened. The light intensified, and Rena felt something ancient wake inside her chest. Power she'd kept locked away for 7 years, the legacy of her bloodline, the gift and curse of the star-blooded. Her father had made her promise never to use it, never to reveal it, but she couldn't stop it now. It poured out of her like water from a broken dam. The golden light enveloped them both, and she felt the exact moment it touched whatever dark thing was tearing Gordon apart from the inside. It was like ice meeting fire, shadow meeting star. The black veins in his arms began to recede. The silver in his eyes flickered, fading back to gray. His claws retracted, becoming human fingers again. He gasped, releasing her throat, and Rena fell to the floor, coughing and gasping for air. The light died as quickly as it had come, leaving them both in darkness. For a long moment, the only sound was their ragged breathing. Then Gordon spoke, his voice hoarse and confused, fully human again. What just happened? Rena scrambled backward, her back hitting the wall, her hand going to her bruised throat. In the dim light from the hallway, she could see him clearly now. He was kneeling on the floor, naked from the waist up, covered in sweat, looking around his destroyed chamber with the bewildered expression of a man waking from a nightmare. He started, then his eyes found her. Really found her, seeing her for the first time. What are you doing here? I heard. Rena's voice came out as a rasp. I heard sounds. I thought someone was hurt. Gordon's gaze sharpened, focusing on her throat where his fingers had left marks. Horror flashed across his face. Did I hurt you? I'm fine, Rena lied. You're not fine. I can see the bruises forming. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. You need to leave. Now. Before it happens again. Before what happens again? Rena asked, though she thought she knew. The stories about the Alpha King suddenly made terrible sense. The reason he isolated himself. The reason he wanted a wife he could ignore. You shift. You lose control. Every full moon, Gordon said bitterly, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. It's getting worse. Lasting longer. The palace physicians say it's a curse, punishment for the violence of my bloodline. Eventually, I won't be able to shift back at all. He looked at her with those pale gray eyes, now fully human but haunted. That's why I needed a wife who wouldn't ask questions, who wouldn't expect anything from me. Because I'm dying slowly, and when I finally lose myself completely to the wolf, I needed to know there would be someone here to sign the documents that transfer power to the council. The raw honesty in his voice struck her harder than his hand around her throat had. This wasn't the cold, dismissive king from the village square. This was a man facing a horrible death, alone and afraid. How long? Rena asked quietly. The physicians say 6 months. Maybe less. He laughed, the sound hollow. So you see, you won't have to endure being my unwanted wife for very long. Rena's mind raced. 6 months. And every full moon, he would shift, become feral, lose more of himself. Unless. Her hands tingled with the memory of the golden light. The way it had pushed back the darkness in his veins. The way it had brought him back from the edge. Her father had told her the star-blooded were meant to be the balance. The light to the wolves' darkness. They calm their rage. That's why kings had hunted her ancestors. That's why her bloodline had nearly been destroyed. Because they were the only ones who could truly control the wolf shifters. You should go, Gordon said, turning away from her. Forget what you saw here. And stay away from my chambers, especially during the full moon. Rena stood on shaking legs, her throat aching, her whole body trembling with the aftermath of using power she'd sworn never to touch. She should leave. Should run back to her gilded cage and lock the door. Instead, she heard herself say, "What if there was another way?" Gordon turned back to her, his expression guarded. What? What if you didn't have to die? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them fully understood yet. In her rooms 3 corridors away, Janella suddenly woke from a sound sleep, her heart pounding with inexplicable dread. And in the shadows outside Gordon's destroyed chamber, Commander Coden stood with his hand on his sword, having heard everything. The powerless peasant queen had just saved the Alpha King's life, and nothing in the palace would ever be the same again. Chapter 4. The Commander's Suspicion. Rena woke to find Commander Coden sitting in her chambers. She gasped, pulling the blankets up to her chin, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was in the chair by the window, perfectly still, his scarred face unreadable in the early morning light. How long had he been watching her sleep? "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty," he said, though his tone held no apology whatsoever. "We need to talk." You can't just enter a lady's private chambers, Rena said, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear crawling up her spine. It's highly inappropriate. I'm the king's commander. I go where I need to go. He leaned forward, his dark eyes fixed on her like a predator studying prey. Especially when something threatens my king's safety. Rena's mouth went dry. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Coden stood, moving closer to the bed with measured steps. Last night, the king had one of his episodes. The worst one yet, according to the servants who cleaned up the mess. Furniture destroyed. Claw marks everywhere. And yet this morning he seems better, calmer. The darkness under his skin has faded. He stopped at the foot of her bed. And the bruises on your throat tell me you were there when it happened. Rena's hand instinctively went to her neck, where purple-black fingerprints marked her skin. She tried to cover them with a high-neck dress, but Coden missed nothing. I heard a noise, she said carefully. I went to investigate. The king was having a nightmare. That's all. A nightmare. Coden's scarred mouth twisted. That left him in better condition than he's been in months. That's quite a remarkable nightmare. He began to circle the room, picking up objects at random. The simple wooden comb from her bag. The worn prayer book her mother had given her. Examining each one with intense scrutiny. I've served Gordon for 10 years, he said conversationally. Fought beside him in 6 campaigns. Watch him slowly lose himself to the curse that runs in his bloodline. I've brought him every healer, every mystic, every physician in the kingdom. None of them could help him. He set down the prayer book and turned to face her directly. So you'll forgive me for being curious when a common girl from a fishing village somehow accomplishes what the kingdom's finest minds could not. I didn't do anything, Rena said, but her voice wavered. Liar. The word was soft, almost gentle. I saw the light, Your Majesty. Golden light, coming from under the door. I've seen that kind of light only once before, in a battle against rebels who'd somehow recruited a witch from the old bloodlines. Rena's blood turned to ice. So I've been asking questions, Coden continued, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket. About Ravenspire. About the Weatherstone family, which isn't your real name, is it? About a disgraced man who died in the woods 7 years ago under suspicion of harboring forbidden magic. He unfolded the paper, and Rena saw it was a map of the Northern Territories, with notes written in tight script along the margins. Your father was Aldrich Stenson, Coden said, watching her face carefully. A scholar who disappeared from the University of Winterhall 25 years ago. Rumor said he discovered something in the old archives. Something about bloodlines that were supposed to be extinct. Rena forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her expression neutral, but her hands were shaking beneath the blankets. The star-blooded, Coden said quietly. The old stories say they could calm the wolf shifters. Control them, even. They were hunted to extinction 200 years ago because kings feared their power. He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. But what if they weren't all killed? What if one bloodline survived, hiding in the north generation after generation waiting? That's a children's story, Rena said, but her voice cracked. Is it? Coden's eyes burned into hers. Then explain what happened last night. Explain how a common washerwoman's daughter brought the Alpha King back from the edge of his wolf madness when nothing else could. Rena's mind raced. She could deny it, but Coden clearly didn't believe her denials. She could try to run, but where would she go? She could tell the truth, but the truth would make her either a weapon to be used or a threat to be eliminated. Why are you telling me this? She finally asked. Why not just report your suspicions to the king? Something flickered across Coden's scarred face. Because Gordon is dying. Because I've watched him suffer for 3 years, knowing I was powerless to help him. Because if there's even a chance you're what I think you are. He trailed off, and for the first time, Rena saw something other than suspicion in his eyes. She saw desperate hope. I don't care what bloodline you come from, he said quietly. I don't care what power you're hiding. I only care about one thing. Can you save him? The question hung in the air between them. Rena thought about Gordon's face last night, the confusion and horror when he'd realized what he'd done. She thought about the golden light that had poured from her hands, instinctive and uncontrollable. She thought about her father's warnings and her mother's tears. I don't know, she whispered honestly. I don't know what I am or what I can do. Coden studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we'd better figure it out. Quickly. Because the next full moon is in 23 days, and if you can't help him, Gordon will be lost forever. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Your Majesty. There are others in this palace who would see the king dead, who would profit from his curse consuming him. If they discover what you might be capable of, they won't hesitate to eliminate you. Like Lady Janella? Rena asked. Coden's laugh was bitter. Janella is a snake, but she's not the most dangerous creature in this court. Watch everyone. Trust no one. His eyes met hers. Except possibly me. For now, our interests align. Then he was gone, leaving Rena alone with the terrifying knowledge that her secret was no longer entirely her own. What neither Rena nor Coden knew was that their conversation had been overheard by a servant in the employ of someone far more dangerous than Janella. And in the city beyond the palace walls, a man named Phelan received a message that made him smile with his cold, calculating smile. The last star-blooded had been found, and the game for power over the Alpha King had just begun. Chapter 5. A Shadow from the Past. The summons came 3 days later. His Majesty requests your presence at the reception for the Southern Envoy, Mrs. Carlson announced, laying out a gown of deep sapphire silk across Rena's bed. You're to stand beside the king and be presented to the court. Rena's stomach twisted. She'd managed to avoid Gordon since the night in his chambers, taking her meals alone, keeping to her wing of the palace. But she couldn't avoid this. The throne room was already filled with nobles when she arrived, their silk and jewels creating a sea of color and wealth that made her feel like a fraud despite her fine new dress. Whispers followed her as she walked toward the raised platform where Gordon stood, his face an unreadable mask. Your Majesty, she said quietly, taking her place beside him. He didn't look at her, but she heard him murmur, We need to talk. Later. About what happened. Before she could respond, the herald's voice rang out. Lord Phelan Greymark, envoy from the Southern Territories. The doors opened, and Rena's blood turned to ice. She knew that face, knew those cold green eyes and that predatory smile. Phelan had been her father's student once, years ago, before everything had fallen apart. Before her father had discovered what Phelan truly wanted from the ancient texts they studied. He'd wanted to find the star-blooded, to use them, to control the wolf shifters and reshape the kingdom's power. And now he was here, walking toward the throne with the confidence of a man who held all the cards, his eyes locked directly on her. Your Majesty, Phelan bowed to Gordon, then turned to Rena with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And Your Majesty, what an unexpected pleasure. I knew your father, years ago. Such a brilliant man. Such a tragic end. The threat was barely veiled. Rena felt Gordon stiffen beside her. Welcome to Thornhaven, Lord Phelan, Gordon said coolly. We'll speak of trade agreements tomorrow. Tonight, enjoy our hospitality. Most gracious, Phelan murmured, but his eyes never left Rena's face. The reception dragged on for hours. Rena smiled when required, nodded at introductions she'd immediately forget, and tried to ignore the way Phelan watched her from across the room like a cat watching a wounded bird. When the evening finally ended and she escaped to the gardens for air, she wasn't surprised to find him waiting by the fountain. Hello, little Rena, he said softly. You've grown. Your father would be proud, or perhaps horrified, depending on his mood. What do you want? Rena demanded, glancing around to ensure they were alone. The same thing I've always wanted. Power. Control. The ability to reshape this kingdom. He moved closer. And you, my dear, are the key to all of it. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. I saw the light 3 nights ago. I have eyes in this palace. You revealed yourself to save the king. His smile sharpened. The last star-blooded, married to the Alpha King. Do you understand what that means? You could control him. Control every wolf shifter in the kingdom. And through them, control everything. I would never. You will, Phelan interrupted. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this palace. Tonight. You're going to come with me to the Southern Territories where we can properly explore your abilities. And in exchange, I won't tell the council what you are. Rena's hands clenched. And if I refuse, then I expose you. The council will have you executed as a threat, just as they executed the rest of your bloodline 2 centuries ago. The king will die of his curse within months, and the kingdom will fall into chaos. He shrugged. Your choice. Save yourself and come with me, or stay here and watch everything burn. She's not going anywhere with you. Both of them spun to find Gordon standing in the garden entrance, Coden beside him. The king's face was dark with fury. Your Majesty, Phelan said smoothly, though Rena saw surprise flicker across his features. "I was just having a private conversation with your wife. I heard enough." Gordon stepped forward. "You'll leave my palace. Now. And if you ever threaten her again, envoy or not, I'll have your head on a spike." For a moment, Phelan's mask slipped, revealing a cold calculation beneath. Then he smiled and bowed. "As you wish, your majesty. But this conversation isn't over." His eyes found Rena's. 23 days until the next full moon. Let's see if your little queen can save you. Or if she'll watch you die rather than accept the help you so desperately need." Then he was gone, leaving Rena shaking in the cold night air. Gordon turned to her, and in his eyes she saw questions. So many questions. "Tell me the truth," he said quietly. "What are you?" Perhaps you're wondering if Rena will finally reveal her secret to Gordon. Perhaps you're asking yourself if she can really trust him, or if Phelan's words hold more truth than threat. Before we find out what happens next, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and whether you think Rena should tell Gordon everything or keep her power hidden. Your support helps me bring you more stories like this. Now, what Rena didn't know was that Janella had witnessed the entire garden confrontation from her window above. And what Gordon didn't know was that the council had already received an anonymous letter about the new queen's unusual abilities. The palace was about to become a very dangerous place, and Rena would have to decide who to trust before the next full moon rose. Chapter 6. The Mask Slips. The royal hunt was a tradition Gordon couldn't avoid, no matter how much he wanted to. Every spring, the king led the noble houses into the Thornwood forest to hunt deer and boar. A display of strength and vitality meant to reassure the court that their ruler was still capable. This year, with whispers of his curse growing louder, the hunt had taken on new significance. Rena had been ordered to attend, dressed in riding clothes she barely knew how to wear, mounted on a gentle mare that seemed to sense her nervousness. "Stay close to the rear," Coden had instructed her that morning. "Don't draw attention. And for the love of the gods, if something happens, don't use your power where others can see." But things never went according to plan. The boar came out of nowhere, massive and enraged, its tusks gleaming like knives. The hunting party scattered, horses screaming and rearing. Gordon, at the front, turned his stallion to face the creature head-on, his spear raised. It happened in seconds. The boar charged. Gordon's horse reared at the wrong moment. The spear went wide, and the boar's tusk caught Gordon's thigh, tearing through leather and flesh with horrible efficiency. Gordon hit the ground hard, blood already pooling beneath him. "The king is down!" someone shouted, and chaos erupted. Rena didn't think. She kicked her mare forward, breaking through the crowd of panicking nobles. Coden was already there, kneeling beside Gordon, his hands pressed against the wound trying to stem the bleeding. "It's bad," Coden said grimly. "The tusk went deep. We need to get him back to the palace now." "He'll bleed out before we get there," Rena said, dismounting. "We need to stop the bleeding here." "With what?" Coden demanded. "We don't have." "Clear the area," Rena interrupted, her voice carrying an authority she didn't know she possessed. "Everyone back to the palace. Now, the commander and I will tend to the king." "You can't possibly," one of the nobles began. "That's an order," Rena snapped. "Go." Perhaps it was the desperation in her voice, or perhaps they simply wanted to escape the blood and chaos. But the hunting party began to disperse, leaving only Rena, Coden, and the unconscious king in the clearing. "Can you do it?" Coden asked quietly. "Can you heal him?" "I don't know," Rena admitted, already kneeling in the blood-soaked grass. "I've never tried deliberately. It just happened." "Then make it happen again," Coden said. "Because if he dies, so does any chance of stopping the people who want to tear this kingdom apart." Rena placed her hands over the wound, feeling the hot wetness of Gordon's blood seeping between her fingers. She closed her eyes and reached for that place inside herself where the light lived, the power she'd inherited from a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she felt warmth building in her palms. The golden light began to glow, soft at first, then brighter, spreading across Gordon's torn flesh like liquid starlight. She felt the wound beneath her hands, felt the torn muscle and severed vessels, and somehow, impossibly, she understood how to knit them back together. The light pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she watched in awe as Gordon's flesh began to close, the ragged edges pulling together, the bleeding slowing and then stopping entirely. But the healing required something from her. She felt her own energy draining, pouring into him, leaving her lightheaded and weak. "Rena," Coden's voice came from somewhere far away. "That's enough. You're going pale." But she couldn't stop. Not until the wound was completely healed. Until the only evidence of the injury was torn leather and blood-soaked clothing. Finally, the light faded. Rena swayed, and Coden caught her before she collapsed. "I've got you," he said. "You did it. Look." Gordon's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his features. What happened?" "The boar," Coden said simply. "You were wounded. Your wife saved your life." Gordon sat up slowly, looking down at his leg where the wound should have been. His fingers touched the torn leather, came away bloody, but beneath his skin was whole. Healed, as if the injury had never happened. His eyes found Rena's, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "Everyone else is gone?" he asked Coden, not breaking eye contact with Rena. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good. Help me up. We need to clean this blood off before we return, or there'll be questions." There was a stream nearby, and Coden helped Gordon to it before diplomatically moving away to keep watch. Rena followed on shaking legs, still weak from the healing. Gordon knelt by the water, washing the blood from his hands and leg. Rena stood awkwardly nearby, unsure what to say, what to do. "Come here," Gordon said quietly. She moved closer, and he reached for her hands, still stained with his blood. Gently, he dipped them in the cold stream water, washing them clean with careful attention. The touch sent electricity through her. His hands were larger than hers, calloused from sword work, surprisingly gentle. She was acutely aware of how close they were, how his shoulder brushed against hers, how she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and rough. "For the second time, you've saved my life." "I couldn't let you die," Rena said, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing. "Why not?" Gordon looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his gray eyes took her breath away. "I've been nothing but cruel to you. I've ignored you, dismissed you, treated you as if you were nothing. You were trying to protect me," Rena said, the understanding coming even as she spoke the words. "From your curse, from the danger of being close to you." Gordon's hands stilled on hers. "How did you?" "Because I've spent my whole life hiding too," she said softly. "Pretending to be less than I am, keeping people at a distance, because closeness means risk. I understand better than you think." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, and Rena felt something shift between them. Something dangerous and electric and entirely unexpected. Gordon's hand moved from hers to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "You're not what I expected," he murmured. "Not at all." Rena's breath caught as he leaned closer, and for one heart-stopping moment, she thought he might kiss her. Then Coden's voice cut through the moment. "Your Majesty, we should go. Before someone comes looking." Gordon pulled back abruptly, the walls slamming back into place behind his eyes. He stood, offering Rena his hand to help her up, but the careful distance had returned. "We don't speak of what happened here," he said, his voice once again cool and controlled. "To anyone." "Of course," Rena managed, trying to ignore the ache of disappointment in her chest. But as they rode back to the palace in silence, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her beside the stream. The way his touch had made her feel alive for the first time since leaving Ravenspire. And she knew, with terrible certainty, that everything had just become far more complicated. What Rena didn't see was the way Gordon's hands tightened on his reins as they rode, fighting against the urge to turn back, to pull her close, to admit that somewhere between the village square and this moment, she'd stopped being just a convenient wife and become something far more dangerous. Someone he was beginning to care about. And in a palace full of enemies, caring was the most dangerous thing he could do. But 17 days remained until the next full moon, and time was running out for both of them. Chapter 7. The Rebels Move. The palace felt different after the hunt. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes darting to Rena as she passed. Nobles watched her with new calculation, as if trying to solve a puzzle they hadn't known existed. Someone had talked, despite Coden's warnings. The king's miraculous recovery hadn't gone unnoticed. Rena was in the library, desperately searching through dusty books about the old bloodlines, trying to understand what she was and what she could do, when the candles suddenly flickered and went dark. "Looking for answers about yourself?" a voice said from the shadows. Rena spun, her heart hammering. A man stepped into the dim moonlight filtering through the windows. He was perhaps 40, with military bearing and cold, intelligent eyes. She'd never seen him before, but something about him radiated danger. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "How did you get in here?" "My name is Fried," he said, moving closer with the casual confidence of someone who knew he held all the power. "And I've been in this palace for 3 days now. It's remarkable how invisible a servant becomes when no one bothers to look at their face." He was right. She'd passed dozens of servants daily and couldn't recall a single face. "What do you want?" Rena asked, gauging the distance to the door. "Don't bother," Fried said, reading her intention. "My men are positioned throughout this wing. Scream, run, or try to use that interesting power of yours, and innocent servants will die. So why don't we just talk?" Rena forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. "Talk about what?" "About you, Lady Rena. Or should I say, last daughter of the star-blooded line." Fried pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for her to do the same. "I've been searching for your family for 15 years. Your father was clever, hiding in plain sight in that fishing village. But everyone makes mistakes eventually. My father is dead," Rena said quietly. "Yes, such a waste." Fried's expression held no real sympathy. "He wouldn't tell me where he'd hidden his daughter, even when my men encouraged him. Loyal to the end. But then you went and revealed yourself to save the cursed king. Made my job much easier." The words hit Rena like physical blows. You killed my father?" "I did what was necessary," Fried said simply. "Just as I'm doing now. You see, Rena, this kingdom is broken. The Alpha King is dying of his curse. The council is corrupt and weak. The people suffer while nobles feast. Someone needs to take control and rebuild it properly. And that someone is you." Rena's voice dripped with contempt. "With the right tools, yes." Fried leaned forward. "Do you know what you're capable of? Your bloodline doesn't just calm wolf shifters. You can control them, command them. Every shifter in the kingdom would be compelled to obey you. And through you, they would obey whoever controlled you." Horror washed over Rena as understanding dawned. "That's what you want. Not to kill Gordon. To use me to control him. And his armies. And every wolf shifter clan in the realm." Fried smiled. "I don't need to fight a war if I have the Alpha King as my puppet. I simply need you." "I'll never help you," Rena said fiercely. "You will. Because if you don't, I'll start killing people you care about. Your mother, for instance. She's still in Ravenspire, isn't she? So easy to get to. Or perhaps the king himself. He's vulnerable during his shifts. One well-placed blade while he's feral and out of control. Gordon has Coden. Has guards. You can't get to him. Can I?" Fried's smile widened. "I've been here 3 days, Rena. I know the guard rotations. I know which servants are loyal and which can be bought. I know exactly when and where the king is most vulnerable." He paused. "But here's what I've realized. I don't need to kill Gordon to destroy him. I just need to take you." Rena's blood ran cold. "What?" "Without you, he'll die of his curse within months. The kingdom will fall into chaos. And in that chaos, I'll rise to power the old-fashioned way, through blood and steel." Fried stood. "So here's your choice. Come with me willingly, let me use your power to take control peacefully, and I'll let your mother live. Let the king live long enough to see what you've become. Or refuse, and I'll kill everyone you care about before dragging you away anyway." "The palace is full of soldiers," Rena said desperately. "You can't just walk out of here with me. Watch me." Fried moved to the window, and Rena saw torches in the distance. Far too many torches, moving through the palace gardens. "I didn't come alone, Rena. I brought an army. And while the palace guards are busy fighting my men at the front gates, you and I will slip out the back." Explosions suddenly rocked the palace. Shouts erupted from outside. The sound of steel on steel rang through the corridors. "It's already begun," Fried said. "So decide quickly. Come willingly and minimize the bloodshed, or resist and watch this palace burn." Rena's mind raced. She could scream, try to alert the guards, but Fried's men would kill servants. She could use her power, but she barely understood it, barely controlled it. She could run, but where? The palace was under attack. And then she realized the horrible truth. Fried was right. She'd been so focused on hiding from the council, from being discovered and used as a weapon, that she'd missed the real danger. She wasn't just a secret to be kept. She was a prize to be claimed. And Gordon, the palace, everyone here, they were all just obstacles in Fried's way. You're wrong about one thing, Rena said quietly, making her decision. What's that? You think I'm helpless. That I need you to teach me what I can do. She felt the power stirring inside her, responding to her fear and rage. But I'm my father's daughter, and he taught me that power without control is dangerous. Her hands began to glow. But you know what's more dangerous? Rena's eyes met Fried's, and she saw his confidence falter for the first time. Power with purpose. The golden light exploded outward. What happened next would change everything. But before we continue, I need to ask you something. If you've been following Rena's story, if you've felt her fear and her courage, if you've wanted to see her fight back against the people who've used her, who've taken everything from her, then please, take just a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support means more than you know. It tells me these stories matter, that Rena's fight matters. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you think Rena should do next. Because what neither Rena nor Fried realized was that Gordon had felt the surge of her power from 3 corridors away. And he was coming, with Coden and every loyal guard in the palace behind him. The battle for Rena's freedom and the kingdom's future was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Star and the Wolf. The golden light from Rena's hands sent Fried stumbling backward, his eyes wide with shock. Seize her, he shouted, and men poured into the library from every entrance, dressed as servants but armed with steel. Rena's power exploded outward instinctively, a wave of golden energy that sent the first wave of attackers flying backward. But she was already weakening, the effort draining her faster than she could sustain. Rena. Gordon's voice cut through the chaos as he burst through the main doors, sword drawn, Coden at his side. His eyes found hers across the room, and she saw relief flash across his face before it hardened into fury. Fried, Gordon growled, recognition darkening his features. I should have known. The rebel commander who's been raiding border villages for months. Hello, cousin, Fried said with a cold smile, and Rena's heart stopped. Surprised? Our grandfather had 2 sons. Yours inherited the throne. Mine was cast aside. But tonight, I take back what should have been my father's. He pulled a vial from his coat and threw it at Gordon's feet. It shattered, releasing a cloud of purple-black smoke that smelled of death and decay. Wolfsbane, Coden choked out, trying to pull Gordon back. Concentrated wolfsbane. But it was too late. Gordon had already inhaled it, and Rena watched in horror as he dropped to his knees, black veins spreading across his skin like poison ink. His eyes flickered silver, then back to gray, his body convulsing as the wolfsbane forced a shift he couldn't control. No, Rena screamed, trying to reach him, but Fried's men surrounded her. The wolfsbane will force him to shift, Fried explained calmly, as if discussing the weather. But it won't let him complete the transformation. He'll be trapped between forms in agony until his heart gives out. Should take about 10 minutes. Plenty of time for us to leave. Gordon's screams tore through the library, inhuman sounds of agony as his body tried and failed to shift. His bones cracked and reformed and cracked again. His skin rippled with fur that disappeared as quickly as it came. He was being torn apart from the inside. And Rena felt something inside herself break. She thought about her father, tortured and killed by this monster. Her mother, alone and grieving. Gordon, who'd been cruel to protect her, who'd looked at her by the stream with such tenderness. All the people who'd suffered because she'd been too afraid to use her power, too afraid to be seen. No more. Let him go, Rena said, and her voice carried a resonance that made the air itself vibrate. I don't think so, Fried began, but his words died as light began to pour from Rena. Not just from her hands this time. From everywhere. From her skin, her eyes, her hair. Golden light so bright it turned the library into midday. So powerful it made Fried's men cry out and shield their faces. Rena's feet left the ground as the full power of the star-blooded bloodline awakened. Her simple dress transformed, becoming something that looked woven from starlight itself. Her dark hair lifted in an invisible wind, shot through with threads of pure gold. And her eyes, her amber eyes, blazed like twin suns. This was what her ancestors had been. This was the power that had made kings kneel and armies fall. You wanted to use me as a weapon, Rena said, her voice echoing with ancient authority. Let me show you why my bloodline was feared. She raised her hands, and the golden light became a force, a wave of pure energy that swept through the library. Fried's men didn't just fall, they were thrown, hurled backward through doors and windows, their weapons melting in their hands, their will to fight simply erased. Freed himself was lifted off his feet, suspended in the air by Rena's power. "You killed my father," Rena said, floating toward him. "You've terrorized innocents. You poisoned a king. And you thought you could control me." "Please," Freed gasped, all his arrogance gone. "Please Coden," Rena said calmly. "Take him to the dungeons. He'll face justice for his crimes." The light released Freed, dropping him into Coden's waiting arms. The commander stared at Rena with awe and something like fear, but he nodded and dragged the rebel away. Then Rena turned to Gordon, and her heart broke. He was still convulsing on the floor, the wolfsbane tearing him apart. Black veins covered his entire body now, and blood trickled from his nose and ears. He was dying. Rena knelt beside him, gathering him into her arms, uncaring of the blood or the danger. She placed her glowing hands on his chest and poured everything she had into him. All her power, all her light, all her life force if necessary. The golden energy flooded into Gordon, seeking out the poison, burning it away cell by cell. She felt his pain as if it were her own, felt his body fighting to survive, felt the moment the wolfsbane finally released its grip. The black veins receded. His convulsions stopped. His breathing steadied. And his eyes opened, silver fading back to gray, looking up at her radiant form with wonder. "Rena," he whispered. "I know," she said softly, tears streaming down her glowing cheeks. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I was afraid." "Don't be sorry," Gordon said, his hand reaching up to touch her face, seemingly unafraid of the power radiating from her. "You're magnificent." The library doors burst open, and suddenly the room filled with nobles, guards, servants, all drawn by the commotion, all stopping in shock at the sight before them. Their plain, unremarkable queen, floating in the air, glowing like a star made flesh, cradling their king in her arms. Lady Janella stood in the doorway, her face pale with shock and fury. The council members clustered behind her, their expressions ranging from awe to calculation to fear. And Rena realized that her secret, the secret her father had died protecting, was now exposed to the entire kingdom. There was no going back, no more hiding, no more pretending to be less than she was. She was star-blooded, the last of her kind, and everyone now knew it. Slowly, Rena lowered herself and Gordon to the ground. The light began to fade, though she knew she could never truly dim it again. She helped Gordon to his feet, and he stood beside her, his hand finding hers and gripping it tightly. Together, they faced the shocked crowd. "The rebel attack has been stopped," Gordon announced, his voice still rough but strong. "Freed is captured. The palace is secure." He paused, then added, "And yes, your queen is star-blooded. The last of a bloodline we thought extinct. She saved my life tonight. She saved all of us." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Fear, suspicion, wonder. "She is under my protection," Gordon continued, his voice hardening. "Anyone who threatens her, for any reason, answers to me. Is that understood?" Silence. Then slowly, Coden stepped forward and dropped to one knee. "My queen," he said simply. Other guards followed. Then servants. Even some of the nobles, though their faces showed they were calculating advantages rather than showing genuine loyalty. But Rena barely noticed. She was looking at Gordon, at the way he held her hand as if he'd never let go, at the expression in his eyes that spoke of more than gratitude. The battle was over. But the war for what came next had just begun. What Rena and Gordon didn't know was that a messenger had already left the palace, riding hard for the southern territories. And when Phelan received the news that the star-blooded had revealed herself, he smiled his cold smile and began making plans. Because a hidden weapon was dangerous, but a revealed one was vulnerable. And the game for power over the last star-blooded, and through her the Alpha King, was far from over. Chapter 9. The True Queen. The council chambers fell silent as Gordon made his announcement. "I'm abdicating," he said, and the room erupted in chaos. It was 3 days after the attack. Freed was in the dungeons awaiting trial, his forces scattered. The palace had been secured, but the revelation of Rena's identity had sent shockwaves through the kingdom. "Your Majesty, you can't possibly," Lord Pemberton began. "I can, and I am," Gordon interrupted. "I claimed Rena as my wife through deception. I took her from her home, treated her as a political convenience, and put her life in danger. She deserves the choice I never gave her." He turned to where Rena sat, still wearing the simple dress she preferred despite the servants' attempts to dress her in more elaborate gowns. Her power was contained now, hidden beneath her skin, but everyone in the room could feel it humming in the air around her. "The council will offer you two options," Gordon said, and his voice was carefully neutral, though Rena could see the tension in his jaw. "First, annulment. The marriage will be dissolved. You'll be given a substantial sum of money, enough to live comfortably anywhere you choose. You can return to your mother, start a new life far from this palace and its politics. You'll be free." Rena's heart clenched. After everything, he was still trying to protect her by pushing her away. "And the second option?" she asked quietly. Gordon's eyes met hers, and she saw everything he wasn't saying. The fear, the hope, the desperate wish that she would stay warring with the certainty that she should go. "You remain queen," he said, "not as a decoration or a signature on documents, but as a true ruler. The council has agreed, given your abilities, that you would hold equal power to mine. We would rule together, as partners." "And what about you?" Rena asked. "What do you want?" The council members shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how these discussions were supposed to go. But Gordon did something that made the entire room gasp. He knelt. The Alpha King, who knelt to no one, dropped to one knee before Rena's chair. "I'm not asking as a king," he said quietly. "I'm asking as a man who has been cruel to you, who has taken everything from you, who has no right to ask for anything more." His voice cracked slightly. "But I'm asking anyway. Stay. Not because you're obligated. Not because you're afraid. But because you choose to." Rena's eyes burned with tears. She thought about Ravenspire, about the people who'd given her up without a fight. She thought about her mother's tears and her father's warnings. She thought about a life of hiding, of making herself small, of never being truly seen. And then she thought about Gordon's face when he'd called her magnificent, about Coden's loyalty, about the servants who'd started looking at her with respect instead of pity, about the power thrumming through her veins that could heal, could protect, could change everything. She stood, and Gordon's expression showed he expected rejection. Instead, Rena placed her hand on his shoulder. Golden light flickered across her fingers, gentle and warm. "Stand up," she said softly. Gordon rose slowly, hope and fear warring in his gray eyes. "I spent my whole life being invisible," Rena said, loud enough for the entire council to hear. "Being unwanted. Being told I was a burden, a curse, something to be hidden away and forgotten. I learned to make myself small because small meant safe." She paused, feeling her power rising, letting it show in the glow of her eyes. "But I'm not small. I'm not a burden. I'm star-blooded, the last of a line that kings feared because we were powerful enough to change the world." Her voice strengthened. "And I'm tired of hiding what I am to make other people comfortable." She turned to the council, to Janella standing in the corner with barely concealed fury, to the nobles who'd whispered about her. "I choose the throne," Rena declared. "Not because it was offered to me, but because I'm claiming it. I will be queen, not in name only, but in truth. I will use my power to protect this kingdom. And I will never, ever make myself small again." The council members looked at each other uncertainly. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. "And the king? What of your arrangement?" Rena looked at Gordon, at this man who'd been cruel and then vulnerable, who'd pushed her away to protect her, and now knelt before her in hope. "That," she said quietly, "is between me and my husband." The formal announcement was made an hour later. The kingdom would have a true queen, one who ruled with equal authority to the king, one who was star-blooded and powerful and would not be hidden. That night, Gordon came to Rena's chambers, not with demands or coldness, but with uncertainty. "I meant what I said," he told her, "about choosing, about being partners. I won't force you into anything you don't want." "I know," Rena said. She moved closer to him, remembering the moment by the stream, the almost kiss that had been interrupted. "But what if what I want is changed?" Gordon's breath caught. "Rena, you told me you would never love me," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "Do you still mean that?" He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I was a fool. I thought I was protecting you by keeping distance between us. I thought I was being kind by not letting you hope for something I didn't think I could give. And now," Rena whispered. Gordon's eyes opened, and they were filled with something that made her heart race. "Now I know that you're the strongest person I've ever met, that you're brave and fierce and more magnificent than I ever imagined, and that somewhere between the village square and this moment, you stopped being an unwanted wife and became the only person I want." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite his strength. I love you, Rena. And I know I have no right to ask if you could ever. She kissed him. It was everything the moment by the stream had promised. Fire and gentleness, and the electricity of two people finally admitting what they felt. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she felt her power respond, golden light flickering around them like starlight made solid. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gordon was smiling. Really smiling, warm and genuine and beautiful. Is that a yes? He asked. That's a yes, Rena laughed, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time. I love you too, even though you're arrogant and impossible, Anne. He kissed her again, and the rest of her words were lost. Outside, the full moon rose over Thornhaven Palace, and for the first time in 3 years, when the silver light touched Gordon's skin, he felt no pain, no forced shift, no darkness crawling through his veins. The curse was broken, because the star-blooded weren't just meant to control wolf shifters. They were meant to heal them, to balance them, to love them, and Rena had finally found where she belonged, not as a burden or a curse or something to be hidden, but as a queen, as herself, finally truly magnificently seen. The end. Thank you for watching Rena's journey from the unwanted girl behind the fruit cart to the queen who changed everything. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not too much, not too little, but exactly enough. Drop a comment telling me what moment in Rena's story resonated with you most. And let me know where in the world you're watching from. Remember, you are not meant to be small. You are meant to shine. Until the next story, stay magnificent.